لصقت بي وغطت ساعدي.
Good afternoon. I'm very delighted to welcome you here. I'm Peter Sluglet, Director of the Middle East Institute. Before we start, it's my sad duty to ask everyone to stand for a minute's silence in honor of the victims of the recent bomb attacks, both in Istanbul and a few hours ago in Jakarta. So please, everybody stand. Thank you. The MEI, in partnership with the Writers' Center at Yale NUS, is holding this reading and discussion of Ashraf Fayadh's poetry in solidarity with the poet who's currently facing the death penalty in Saudi Arabia. Fayadh, a 35-year-old Palestinian poet and art curator who lives in Saudi Arabia, was sentenced to death by a Saudi court on the 17th of November 2015 for the alleged crime of apostasy, that is, in ordinary language, rejecting Islam. He has been denied access to a lawyer throughout his detention and trial. I mean, not unusual in Saudi Arabia. Though he stands accused of blaspheming and promoting atheism throughout his collection of poetry, Instructions Within, published in 2008, Fayadh asserts that the poems are, quote, just about me being a Palestinian refugee, about cultural and philosophical issues. But the religious extremists have characterized it as destructive ideas against God. Through readings of his work in both Arabic and English, we will acknowledge the injustice suffered by Fayadh and his substantial contribution to the global art scene and to Arabic literature. Events like this one are taking place throughout the world, as you can see in this handout, from Austria to Zimbabwe. And I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Heidi Staller of Yale NUS Writing Center.
Thank you very much. So on behalf of the Yale NUS Writers Center, I want to say thank you, first of all, to the Middle East Institute for hosting this iteration of the worldwide reading of Ashraf Fayadh's poetry. We, of course, jumped at this opportunity to support Ashraf Fayadh, the fiercely talented and passionate Palestinian poet and supporter of the arts. We firmly support his right to free and poetic expression of his experiences, values, and the complexities of his beliefs. We believe that language has power to heal, to create understandings rather than divisions, and importantly, to promote security, peace, and trust in areas of fear and conflict. As writers, artists, and public intellectuals, we need to be able to speak and create freely, as through our work, we represent the common language of private individuals. In other words, the thoughts, emotions, and experiences that cross national and religious boundaries. In his poetry, Fayadh writes often of the contrast between light and darkness. He says that, quote, the dark always frightens, even when we're used to it, end of quote. and he will, quote, chase light. He says, the sun has no choice but to resist the dark. The poetic expression of human experience is the best and most peaceful kind of call to arms, and such expression must remain vital and protected, not silenced or darkened. I am glad that today we at NUS, along with others across the globe, with this reading of Ashraf Fayadh's work, are acknowledging and resisting a strange and fearful political temperature right now coming out of Saudi Arabia, challenging all that education stands for. I would like to thank and welcome poet Alvin Pang, who will read translations of Fayadh's poems in English this evening. Alvin Pang is a distinguished poet, writer, editor, and translator. He's a fellow of the Iowa International Writing Program and also directs the Literary Center in Singapore, which is a nonprofit transcultural initiative. And now I would like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Gretchen Head, who specializes in modern Arabic literature and is Assistant Professor of Humanities at Yale NUS. She'll say a few words, and then we'll present our Arabic readers this evening. Thank you.
Hi, and thanks so much for coming. So I'm just going to say a word about Ashraf Fayadh, who Peter has already told us is a poet of Palestinian origin, born in Saudi Arabia, a leading member of Saudi's burgeoning art scene, having curated shows in Jeddah and at the Venice Biennial. He's also a key member of the British Saudi art organization, Edge of Arabia. He was first detained by the country's religious police in 2013 in Abha in southwest Saudi Arabia. The religious police claim that they received a complaint that he had cursed God and the Prophet Muhammad, insulted Saudi Arabia, and distributed a book of poems, which was already mentioned, called Instructions Within, and which we'll be hearing excerpts from, that promoted atheism. Fayadh himself says that the complaint arose from a personal dispute with another artist during a discussion about contemporary art in a cafe in Abha. He was released on bail after one day, but the police arrested him again on January 1st, 2014, confiscating his ID and detaining him at a police station until he was transferred to the local prison 27 days later. According to Fayadh's friends, when the police failed to prove that his poetry was atheist propaganda, they began berating him for smoking and having long hair. The verdict of the first court to sentence him gave him 4 years in prison and 800 lashes. Upon appeal, the Saudi authorities then said that he would have a retrial with a different prosecutor and judge, yet the new judge rendered the verdict without so much as speaking to him. It is this judge who passed a death sentence on Fayadh for apostasy in November of 2015. It is commonly thought that he is, at least in part, being punished by hardliners for posting a video online showing the religious police in Abha lashing a man in public, meaning that the sentence is possibly revenge enacted by the morality police. It has also been suggested that his status as a Palestinian refugee makes him a target even though he was born in Saudi Arabia. As was already noted, he's accused of spreading atheism, but in his own description of his work, this is not really what it's about, and this is much more of a political issue. So it's worth pausing here for a moment to think about the idea of atheism in the Arab or Islamic world. In this context, we need to realize that there's a different idea of the public-private split than what we find in many places. So I'm going to necessarily have to speak in generalities here, but in short, people have the right to think or believe whatever they want. Islamic law prohibits the use of inquisitorial methods, meaning the religious authorities or the state cannot, in theory, forcibly try to reveal a person's internal religious beliefs. That doesn't mean, however, that people have the right to publicly express whatever religious beliefs they want. When speech enters into the public sphere, and this of course includes the very public act of publication, it then carries the potential to convince others, and people don't have the right to try to lead others to adopt beliefs considered to be disruptive of the social order. We know that Saudi Arabia is not a secular state. The charge of atheism is not, in fact, about the personal conviction of disbelief, but about the idea that once that conviction is made public, it can influence the larger community and pull them towards disbelief. And that's what's against the law in this particular context. The charges in Ashraf Fayadh's case, you might notice, are always phrased as spreading atheism rather than being atheist or holding atheist beliefs. In any case, the sentence we see here is extraordinarily unusual and harsh, even for the charge of spreading atheism, which doesn't usually carry the death penalty. The question of freedom of expression in Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries is also a complicated one. It's often not clear precisely where the lines are, and it's far from predictable what will be censored and what won't. There are essentially two central categories of censorship, not just in Saudi Arabia, but throughout the Arab world. The issue can either be one of blasphemy or morality, or more overtly political, as would actually seem to be the case with Fayadh, despite the official charge. Spreading atheism here is very likely to be religious rhetoric meant to cover a more straightforward political offense to a regime that doesn't tolerate criticism. I think the poetry we'll be hearing today supports this interpretation. On that note, I'd like to read the opening and closing paragraphs of a poem just translated this morning, entitled On the Virtues of Oil Over Blood. And in general, when we listen to the poetry, we maybe want to think what the Saudi authorities are really reacting to. Oh, you who have been made homeless, your homelessness sprawled across lands, penniless and in despair, as oblivion unfurls between your ribs. The mute blood of yours will never speak out as long as you brag about death and proclaim secretly how you've safeguarded the soul to those who cannot understand it. It will take ages to lose your soul and console your eyes' fear for all the oil it once gushed. This was what a leader of the people said. Whoever has oil can meet his needs from its byproducts, which is far better than he who torches his eyes and turns his own heart into a god. Black pellets of oil circulate throughout your cells, healing what your nausea could not vomit. Oil is utterly blameless except for its stains of poverty. So on that note, I'd like to turn to our first Arabic reciter, who is Ms. Lauren Al-Kurdi, right, who will be reciting an excerpt from Frida Kahlo's Mustache in Arabic, after which Alvin Pang will read the English, and then we will have an Arabic recitation of Asylum by Ms. Zubayda Abdel Jalil, and then we'll have the recital in English, and then we'll have a few more poems that we will only do in English. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your introduction. مقاطع من قصيدة شوارب فريدة كالو. سأضطر للتحليل على ذاكرتي والادعاء بأنني أنام جيداً، وسأمزق كل ما تبقى من الأسئلة التي أصبحت تبحث عن مبرر للحصول على الإجابات المقنعة، بعد أن أسقطت كل علامات الترقيم المعتادة بدافع شخصيتي بحت. العالم هذا الصباح يشبه معدتي المصابة بالحرقة، الصداع الذي يقضي عطلته الأسبوعية في رأسي، يشبه أكوام الزجاج المكسور التي تملأ ذاكرتي. لم يعد العالم على ما يرام منذ أن توقفت عن القلق بشأن الزجاج. ما هي فكرتك عن أيامي التي اعتدت قضاؤها من دونك؟ عن كلماتي التي كانت تتبخر بسرعة، عن وجعي الثقيل، عن العقد التي ترسبت في صدري مثل طحالب جافة. نسيت أن أخبرك بأني معتاد على غيابك من الناحية العملية، وبأن الأمنيات ضلت طريقها نحو رغباتك، وأن ذاكرتي قد بدأت بالتآكل، وأني لا زلت أطارد الضوء، ليس رغبة في الرؤية بقدر أن الظلام يبقى مخيفاً حتى وإن اعتدنا عليه. ما هي فكرتك عن أيام التي اعتدت قضائي من دونك؟ وأنني لا زلت أطارد الضوء، ليس رغبة في الرؤية بقدر أن الظلام يبقى مخيفاً، وحتى إن اعتدنا عليه. Thank you.
First, I'd just like to thank Middle East Institute and Yale NUS for organizing this, for putting this together, and for the opportunity to stand with a brother in poetry. Nothing we do here or anywhere else in the world can approach the anguish and anxiety I think that he's facing right now. I really think he's going to be okay. But what we can do is remind ourselves of why this work, his work, matters. From the poem, Frida Kahlo's Mustache. I'll be forced to trick my memory and pretend that I have no problem sleeping, and rip all the remaining questions, the questions that now justify their search for persuasive answers, after all punctuation has been dropped for purely personal reasons. The world this morning resembles my stomach with its ulcers, resembles the ache that spends its weekends in my head, resembles the heaps of broken glass that fill my memory. The world is no longer all right since I've stopped worrying about glass. What's your idea about my days that I usually spend without you? About my words that used to rapidly evaporate? About my heavy pain? About the knots that had sedimented inside my thorax like dried up algae? I forgot to tell you that in the practical sense of the word, I've grown used to your absence, and that my wishes have lost their way to your desires, and my memory has begun to corrode. And that I still chase light, not because I want to see. The dark always frightens, even when we're used to it.
So now I'll be reading Asylum by Ashraf Fayadh. اللجوء أن تقف في آخر الصف كي تحصل على كسرة وطن. الوقوف شيء كان يفعله جدك دون معرفة سببه، والكسرة أنت. الوطن بطاقة توضع في محفظة النقود، والنقود ورقة ترسم عليها صورة الزعماء، والصورة تنوب عنك ريثما تعود، والعودة كائن أسطوري ورد في حكاية الجدة. انتهى الدرس الأول.
First section of Asylum. Asylum, to stand at the end of a queue, to be given a morsel of bread, to stand, something your grandfather used to do, without knowing the reason why. The morsel, you. The homeland, a card to put in your wallet. Money, papers that carry images of leaders. The photo, your substitution pending your return. And the return, a mythological creature from your grandmother's tales. End of the first lesson. I've been tasked with reading two longer poems of his that are in your handouts, and I will just proceed. The first is, I believe, page 1. The first page, first poem in your handouts. It's called The Last of the Line of Refugee Descendants. Some of the lines will sound familiar. You give the world indigestion and some other problems. Don't force the ground to vomit and stay close to it, very close. A fracture that can't be set, a fracture that can't be resolved or added to the other numbers. So you give rise to a certain confusion in global statistics. Being a refugee means standing at the end of a queue to get a fraction of a country. Standing is something your grandfather did without knowing the reason, and the fraction is you. The country, a card you put in your wallet with your money. Money, pieces of paper with pictures of leaders. Pictures, they stand in for you until you go back. Going back, a mythic creature that appears in your grandfather's stories. Here endeth the first lesson. The lesson is conveyed to you so that you can learn the second lesson, which is, what do you signify? On the day of judgment, they stand naked, and you swim in the spillage from the cracked sewage pipes. Barefoot, that's healthy for the feet, but unhealthy for the ground. For your sake, we will set up rostrums and hold conferences, and the newspapers will write about you in the appropriate manner. A new formula has been developed to eliminate recalcitrant dirt, and at only half the price. Hurry to buy up half the amount, because the water shortage is very acute. Serious negotiations are underway to provide ashes for free so that you won't choke without affecting the right of trees to live on earth. Learn how to avoid using up all your ash allowance in one go. They taught you how to lift your head up so that you can't see the dirt on the ground. They taught you that your mother is the earth. And your father, you're looking for him to confirm your lineage. They taught you that your tears are an extravagant waste of water. And water, as you know. Tomorrow, it'll be a good idea to get rid of you, because the earth would look better without you. Children are like sparrows because they don't build nests in dead trees. And the UN agency isn't responsible for planting trees. Use yourself as a bargaining card, as a piece of paper with a poem on it, a piece of toilet paper, a piece of paper for your mother to light the stove and bake some loaves. The weather forecast, the sun is lying in bed because it has a temperature. The bones clothed in flesh and then with skin. The skin gets dirty and gives off a horrible smell. The skin burns and is affected by supernatural factors. Take yourself as an example. Don't give up hope. Take heart from the exile from which you are fleeing. This is intensive training for living in hell and in your harsh conditions. My God, is hell somewhere on earth? The prophets have gone into retirement, so don't expect any prophet to be sent your way for your sake. For your sake, the observers submit daily reports and are paid high salaries. How important money is for the sake of a decent life. Abu Said's falafel are exposed to contamination, and the dispensary is announcing that the inoculation campaign is ending. So don't worry about your children being contaminated as long as the dispensary is there. Live coverage of the proceedings of the beauty contest. That girl looks good in her bikini. And that one has a rather large bottom. Breaking news, sudden rise in the number of deaths from smoking. The sun is still a source of light, and the stars are peeping in at you because your roof needs repairing. An argument at the taxi depot. We don't have enough passengers to leave yet. But my wife is in labor. This is her 10th pregnancy. Hasn't she learned anything? There are reports warning of random population growth. Random, that's the word I've been looking for ages. We're living in a random world. We're multiplying and our children stand naked. Sources of inspiration for filmmakers or for discussions around the table at the G8. We are small people, but they can't live without us. For our sake, some buildings have fallen down and some railway stations have been blown up. Iron is liable to rust. For our sake, there are plenty of picture messages. We are actors who don't get paid. Our role is to stand as naked as when our mothers gave birth to us, as when the earth gave birth to us, as the news bulletins gave birth to us, and the multi-page reports, and the villages that border on settlements, and the keys my grandfather carries. My poor grandfather. He didn't know that the locks had changed. My grandfather made the doors that open with digital cards curse you, and may the sewage water that runs past your grave curse you. May the sky curse you, and not the rain. Never mind, your bones can't grow from under the soil, so the soil is the reason we don't grow again. Granddad, I'll stand in for you on the day of judgment, because my private parts are no strangers to the cameras. Do they allow filming on the day of judgment? Granddad, I stand naked every day without any judgment, without anyone needing to blow any last trump, because I've been sent on in advance. I am hell's experiment on the planet Earth, the hell that has been prepared for refugees. Next poem is titled in translation, A Space in the Void. Everything has weight. Your weight is well known to the back walls because your heavy shadow doesn't give the asphalt, the paint, or the writings stuck on the windows a chance to appear. You also have space, significant space, in the void. The air is polluted, and the dumpsters are too, and your soul too, ever since it got mixed up with carbon. And your heart, ever since the arteries were blocked and it refused to grant citizenship to the blood coming back from your head. Without your memory, you'd lose much of your weight. You need to follow a proper diet to lose more of you. Make up your mind quickly, because the Earth's gravity doesn't wait long. Hint, replace the time factor with your name so that you find the right way to throw the last page of your diary right into the rubbish bin. You consume enough air for 2 newborn babies, if the screaming was equal, given that the air molecules around you carry sound badly and your throat needs repairing. A beggar woman of more than 50 displays her dignity in a rag studded with coins. She prays that you and that pretty woman who happens to be walking beside you will soon be blessed with a child to fill another part of the void in return for a coin. The time has come for you to pick up the pace, not sexually, and for you to change your smelly socks. A scientific fact, bacteria grows rapidly. Succumb to sleep, because the time has come for you to melt and dissolve, to take the shape agreed for the alienation into which you have been poured. Evaporate, condense, and go back to your void, to occupy your usual shape, to occupy your usual space in the you. Heidi.
I'm going to read a poem now. Gretchen, correct me, I think it was written in November, just a month ago maybe, by Yusuf Raqqa. Do I have that right? Called Listen, Ashraf. Listen, Ashraf. Ashraf Fayadh, I do believe the explosion is about to, and would like to make clear that the rain's now making swimming pools of houses down the coast. Today, I saw a man hugging a fridge, half his legs underwater, and his wife was leaping from one chandelier to another, like Tarzan's woman. Your head, I believe, is on your body now, and the bomb ticks second by second. Sure, 5% of the world cannot shoulder all this stupidity. Now, the explosion, Ashraf, and I, had I been out of range of fragments, would have thought the white cloaks, ghosts flapping at unseen things. Its bang perhaps will make us into flying fish, and the buildings to bottles of alcohol-free beer, foam spilling over as they clink. Your head, Ashraf, and the man bending with sword and spectators' shrubs of chalk, and the great rift itself, a kind of stage play that the homeless on their pavement play to scare the freeholders. Here, they say, they are at war with terrorism. Ashraf, the explosion is in my head, and it is strange, I believe, that there is genetic engineering, greenhouse effect, that there is nuclear fission, and, two, the man with half his legs underwater. Water, enough in the sky to drown the world, and no umbrellas at the coast.
So now I'm going to read a short essay by Iqbal Ahmed, written in 1999. The larger essay is called Religion and Politics. And he was one of the most important Muslim intellectuals, thinkers, especially around some of these issues about the way religion intersects with politics. He died in 1999, shortly after he wrote this essay. Here I discuss how the so-called fundamentalists, in particular the Islamist variety, relate to the religious tradition they claim to cherish and represent. The religious idiom is greatly favored in their discourse, its symbols are deployed and rituals are observed. Yet no religio-political movement or party has, to my knowledge, incorporated in a comprehensive fashion the values or traditions of Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Hinduism in their programs and activities, nor have they set examples of lives lived, individually or collectively, in accordance with the cherished values of the belief system they invoke. What they do is to pick out whatever suits their political purposes, cast these in sacred terms, and invest them with religious legitimacy. This is a deforming, though easy thing to do. All religious systems are made up of discourses which are, more often than not, dialectically linked to each other, as in light and darkness, peace and war, evil and goodness. Hence it is possible to detach and expropriate a part from the whole, divest it of its original context and purpose, and put it to political uses. Such an instrumentalist approach is nearly always absolutist, that is, it entails an absolute assertion of one, generally decontextualized aspect of religion and a total disregard of another. The phenomenon distorts religion, debases tradition, and twists the political process wherever it unfolds. The idea of jihad is a case in point. It is an Islamic precept with multiple meanings, which include engagement in warfare, social service, humanitarian work, intellectual effort, or spiritual striving. The word is formed from an Arabic root, which corresponds to the English letters JHD, which denotes an intense effort to achieve a positive goal. Jihad entails then a striving to promote the good and overcome the bad, to bring light where there is darkness, prosperity where there is poverty, remedy where there is sickness, knowledge where there is ignorance, clarity where there is confusion. The mujahada, as also jihad in early Islamic usage, was an engagement with oneself for the achievement of moral and spiritual perfection. A mujtahid is a religious scholar who does ijtihad, i.e. strives to interpret religious texts in the light of new challenges and circumstances. In early Islamic history, when the need to defend and also enlarge the community of believers was deemed paramount, jihad became widely associated with engagement in warfare. Following a prophetic tradition, some early theologians divided jihad in two categories: the physical jihad, participation in religious wars of which the rules and conditions were strictly laid down, was assigned the lesser jihad category. Its premises were strictly defined. As Muslim power and numbers increased and pluralistic patterns of life and outlook emerged, there were clashes between points of view no less than personal ambitions. Similarly, wars and dynastic conflicts frequently involved convergences of interest and alliances between Muslims and non-Muslims, and battles were fought. Traditionally, these were described variously as harb, qital, or muqattala, but not as jihad, a tradition which has been all but jettisoned by contemporary Islamists. The greater jihad was that which one undertook within the self and society, to conquer greed and malice, hates and anger, ego and hubris, above all to achieve piety, moral integrity, and spiritual perfection. The great Sufis invested in the concept and even deeper meaning of striving to subjugate the self, jihad bin nafsihi, to the service of the Creator and His creation. Many of them dedicated their lives to the service of the weak and needy, by their example attracted millions to embrace Islam, and in such places as India continued to be revered by Muslims and Hindus alike. It is a rare Islamist party today that devotes itself meaningfully to the mission of helping peoples and communities. To the contrary, contemporary Islamists view with disfavor those who would follow the example of the Sufi saints who in their time had waged the greater jihad. Without a hint of doubt, contemporary Muslim ideologues and militants have reduced the rich associations of jihad to the single meaning of engagement in warfare, entirely divested of its conditions and rules. Thus, the war against a Marxist government in Afghanistan and its Soviet ally became the most famous jihad of the 20th century, even though it was armed and financed by the United States, a non-Muslim superpower. Today, such activities as terrorism, sectarian strife, and the killings of innocent people are claimed as holy warfare. This reductionism is by no means unique to the Muslim world. The same obsessions occupy the Jewish and Christian variants of religious political movements. Not long ago, a ranking rabbi of Israel ruled that in the cause of expanding Israeli settlements in Palestine, the killing of Arabs was religiously ordained. In the Islamist discourse, I am unable to recognize the Islamic, religion, society, culture, history, or politics, as lived and experienced by Muslims through the ages. The Islamic has been in most respects a pluralistic civilization marked with remarkable degrees of diversity and patterns of antagonism and collaboration. The cultural life of the traditional Muslim was formed by at least 4 sets of intellectual legacies. Theology was but one such legacy. The others were philosophy and science, aesthetics, and mysticism. Contemporary Islamists seek to suppress all but a narrow view of the theological legacy. Religious scholars, artists, poets, and novelists, including Nobel laureate Naguib Mahfouz, have suffered persecution and assault at the hands of self-appointed champions of Islam. Complexity and pluralism threaten most, hopefully not all, contemporary Islamists because they seek an Islamic order reduced to a penal code, stripped of its humanism, aesthetics, intellectual quests, and spiritual devotion. Their agenda is simple, therefore very reassuring to the men and women who are stranded in the middle of the ford between the deep waters of tradition and modernity. Neither Muslims nor Jews nor Hindus are unique in this respect. All variants of contemporary fundamentalism reduce complex religious systems and civilizations to one or another version of modern fascism. They are concerned with power, not with the soul, with the mobilization of people for political purposes rather than with sharing or alleviating their sufferings and aspirations. Theirs is a very limited and time-bound political agenda. Thank you.